I never imagined that the day I'd dreamed of for so many years, the day I'd finally leave behind the constant weight of my family's problems, would turn into the most humiliating nightmare of my life. There I was, walking down the aisle in my simple white dress, the air scented with lilacs from the garden, the smiles of the guests lighting up the sanctuary, until a devastating secret from my fiancé exploded right in front of everyone. It was as if the world had stopped. The intruder's words cut through the air like glass, and my world crumbled, a dry leaf crunching under hurried feet in a quiet little town in Ohio. My wedding morning began with that typical Midwestern chill, the kind that seeps into your bones, even in late spring. The sky was gray, with heavy clouds as if they sensed what was to come. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, in that modest two-story house on the outskirts of our small town, surrounded by maple trees, quiet streets, and neighbors who still wave from their porches as if it were 1950. The house smelled of strong coffee brewed in the old coffee pot my mother refuses to replace, mixed with the faint mustiness of the floral wallpaper that has never been replaced. I slept there, far from Mark, obeying the old tradition of not seeing the groom before the ceremony. But the truth is, my family needed me. My father, diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's, had his worst moments early in the morning. He would wander the kitchen in his old plaid robe, mumbling about jobs that no longer existed and staring into space, trapped in memories that time insisted on erasing. Mom did what she could, but she was exhausted, 10 years older and 2. She trembled as she poured my coffee, her voice wavering as she repeated the question she'd been asking me for months. "Are you sure about this Mark guy?" I forced a smile and said yes. It was a lie. I doubted it. But after years of trying to keep everyone afloat, my father, my mother, my students, my own sanity, Mark felt like a lifeline. I was 45, a teacher at the local elementary school. I spent my days amid exams, hyperactive children, and budget cuts. At home, I dealt with medications, appointments, crises, and the constant longing for a life I hadn't lived. My brothers were away, one in California, reeling after a messy divorce, the other nearby, but caught up in her own children and marital dramas. The burden fell on me. Mark showed up when I'd almost given up. We met at the county fair, amid the smells of fried food and the roar of the Ferris wheel. He seemed stable, kind, an accountant from the city with a New York past and plans for a simple future. He brought flowers, helped with groceries, and promised a fresh start. He said we'd build something together, maybe a bigger house, far from the night trains echoing through the city. I wanted to believe. On the morning of the wedding, I donned my dress with lace sleeves and a touch of hope. It was simple, bought at a discount store in Dayton, but it was enough. I looked in the mirror in the bedroom that once held posters from my youth and saw someone tired, but still believing. The church was old, with colorful stained glass windows and polished wooden pews. Friends began arriving. Schoolmates, cousins from Cleveland with their potluck platters, Mark's acquaintances. Among them, some strange faces that would later make perfect sense. The sun tried to break through the clouds, casting pale rays on the red brick facade. My father was led to the front pew with my mother's help. He held the wedding program, uncomprehending but smiling. The organ played Canon in D, and I entered, roses in hand and a knot in my stomach I couldn't explain. Mark was waiting for me at the altar, elegant in his rented suit. His hand gripped mine tightly, sweating. The ceremony began, the pastor's words echoing among the wooden beams. My eyes roamed over the familiar faces, searching for approval, love, strength. But fate had other plans. If anyone has anything against this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence, for an eternal second, until the back door burst open with a bang. A woman entered, her heels clicking like a hammer on the stone floor. Her black dress was wrinkled, her eyes red, and in her hand, a thick envelope. The entire church turned. The air grew heavy. "Mark," she shouted. I felt his hand go cold. From then on, everything became a horror movie in slow motion. She marched down the aisle, the smell of cigarettes overpowering the scent of flowers. "Did you think you could just disappear? Start over. Pretend we never existed." The pastor tried to intervene. Several cell phones appeared discreetly. My mother covered her mouth in shock. My father mumbled something about the trucker's wife. The woman arrived at the altar and dumped papers on the floor, Birth certificates, photos, a marriage certificate dated years before our first meeting. He's married. To me. We have children. She wept, her face transfigured with pain and anger. Mark stammered, denied, then admitted. First in whispers, then aloud. It was true. He had another life, another family. I fell to my knees, the bouquet on the floor, my eyes fixed on the image of a home that would never be. Chaos swept through the church like a summer storm over the flat Ohio fields. The woman, Elena, as I later learned, dissolved in tears in front of everyone. As the guests rose, confused, murmuring, filming, debating what they had just witnessed, Mark said nothing. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Photos with children who had her eyes, hidden deposit receipts, bank statements, lying emails. I couldn't breathe. My mother tried to lift me, but my legs wouldn't respond. The wedding dress that had once symbolized a new beginning now felt like a burden, a dirty white weight dragging my dignity across the floor. My father, lost in his own mental fog, just looked at me and smiled, saying, "You look beautiful, Lizzie." He thought he was mom on their wedding day. I wanted to cry, scream, run away, all at the same time. When the police arrived, summoned by one of Mark's colleagues who suspected something strange about the company's finances, the scene was already a theater of tragedy. Elena, exhausted, sat beside me and in an unexpected gesture, held my hand. Two strangers, united by the pain of having trusted the same man. "I'm sorry for you too," she whispered. I just nodded, unable to respond. In the church basement, where the jars of potato salad and homemade pies sat untouched on the plastic tables, the silence was deathly. The guests had dispersed, some out of shame, others for lack of anything to say. Gossip was already spreading like wildfire. Mom tried to make plans, organize, protect. But I knew there was no fixing it. The shame was too great. The wound, too deep. Elena told me everything through tears. Mark had abandoned her and the children almost 2 years ago, disappearing after saying he needed to get his life in order. She found out about me from a silly social media post of his, a photo of us at a picnic with a sappy caption. She hired a detective. She gathered evidence. She waited for the right moment to prevent another woman from falling into the same trap. And she succeeded. I returned home that late afternoon with my dress still wet from the rain, my hair loose, and my face swollen. My mother drove, silent. My father dozed in the back seat, the wedding certificate still crumpled in his lap. The car radio played a country song about heartbreak. There was no need to change the station. It was like the soundtrack to my life. The first 48 hours after the wedding that never happened passed like a heavy fog that wouldn't dissipate, even when the sun timidly peeked through the living room curtains. I was sitting on the same sofa where my father used to tell stories of the roads he'd traveled as a truck driver, now staring into space, feeling my body present but my soul floating far away, lost somewhere between the altar and the church door where everything fell apart. My mother insisted on serving me tea, as if a little chamomile could erase the fact that the man I was going to marry was a fraud, a criminal, a husband to another woman, and the father of 2 children I'd never met. My father, in one of his rare moments of lucidity, looked at me and said, "It's not the end of the world, dear. It's just a bend in the road." I wanted to believe him, but at that moment, the road was potholed, dark, and without signs. The worst part wasn't the scandal. It wasn't the pitying looks at the grocery store, nor the confusing messages I received from schoolmates trying to show support with cliches like, "You are strong," or "Everything happens for a reason." What destroyed me inside was the silence of the room that would be ours, the absence of goodnight messages, the echo of his voice telling me I was his future, a lie wrapped in gold ribbon. Staying home was suffocating, but going out meant facing the world wide-eyed, waiting for the show to go on. The town was too small to forget something so big. At the bakery, a woman commented loudly, "The poor thing," and to think she looked so happy at church. As if my pain were entertainment. As if my life were a primetime soap opera. The school granted me an unofficial leave of absence. In practice, I was on leave so as not to become a topic of conversation among the students' parents. The well-meaning principal suggested I take some time to take care of myself. I thanked her, but inside I felt only shame. Shame for having been deceived. Shame for having exposed myself. Shame for having believed. The nights were worse. The silence of the house was broken only by the sound of my father's heavy breathing in the next room, or my mother's occasional coughs when the cold set in. I sat on the bedroom floor, still decorated with photos of a future that now seemed like fiction. One of them, from the picnic in Hocking Hills, with Mark smiling and hugging me, made me nauseous. I tore it down. Then I tore them all down. But the holes in the empty frames only made the pain seem more concrete. It was on one of these nights that I received my first call from Elena. She told me she didn't want to bother me, but thought it only fair to share more information, if only so I could know who I'd really gotten involved with. For over an hour, she told stories about the beginning of her marriage with Mark, the way he'd been in the beginning, charming, helpful, even passionate. But over time, he'd become distant. He'd disappear for days, claiming meetings. Then came the debts, the lies, the manipulation. You weren't stupid. He's a pro at this. He deceived me too, she said. That coming from her was like a hug I didn't even know I needed. Over time, we exchanged messages almost daily. Two women united by a mistake. We shared small victories. She managed to schedule a counseling appointment for her children. I finally managed to sleep a full night. She said her life in New York was chaotic and cramped, but that her children were smiling again. I told her about my attempts to reorganize my finances, to understand the documents that showed the fraud Mark had committed using my name. I discovered he had made me the guarantor on a loan worth nearly $40,000. Forged signatures, manipulated information. He had access to everything because I trusted him. That's when I decided to seek a lawyer. A serious man with gray hair and tired eyes. He reviewed the documents, shaking his head slowly. He was meticulous. It will be difficult, but not impossible, he said. It was the most optimistic I'd heard that week. The legal battle was beginning, with bureaucratic red tape that made me sick just thinking about it. Hearings, certificates, police reports, bank statements, school reports, a compilation of my life being dissected to prove I was a victim. In the midst of all this, my father had a breakdown. He got lost in the backyard at night, disoriented, screaming his dead brother's name. My mother found him barefoot, covered in dirt, shivering from the cold. That was the last straw. She cried in the kitchen while I made tea. I can't do it alone anymore, honey. I'm at my limit. And it was true. She needed help, and I was at rock bottom trying to build a ladder out of broken pieces. But there was something inside me that wouldn't die. A spark, small, insistent. I started therapy. A warm room downtown, filled with books and with a soft-spoken therapist who looked at me with the eyes of someone who had seen many falls and many new beginnings. In the first few sessions, I just cried. Then I started talking. And before I knew it, I started listening. She told me something I've never forgotten. You're not foolish for having loved. You're brave for having tried. And maybe deep down I was. After the dust settled, what remained wasn't just destruction. It was a kind of deafening emptiness, as if everything inside me had been ripped away, leaving a hollow shell, sensitive to the slightest breath. The routine, once overwhelming because of caring for my father and the burden of supporting the household, now also became my refuge. It was no longer just what I did to survive. It was everything that kept me from falling apart completely. Getting up early, making coffee, making sure my father took his medication on time, driving my mother to work when her arthritis flared, these tasks became my anchor. I knew exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And in this knowing, I rediscovered small fragments of the woman I was before everything came crashing down at the altar. At school, the environment was still delicate. Returning to work was like stepping onto shaky ground. Fake smiles from colleagues, hushed whispers in the hallway. Mothers who had previously spoken to me familiarly now gave me looks of pity or morbid curiosity. But the children, they didn't know about scandals, betrayals, or headlines in Facebook groups. To them, I was still Teacher Anna, the one who read stories with funny intonation and drew pictures on the board with colored markers. It was in their pure gazes that I found the first spark of healing. I started saying no more often. Not to favors that overwhelmed me. Not to commitments that drained my energy. Not to people who had previously taken advantage of my tendency to want to solve everything. For the first time in years, I set boundaries, and that scared a lot of people. My sister, for example, took a while to understand that I was no longer the family's crutch. When she called me saying she couldn't pick up her children from school because she was mentally exhausted, and I replied that I was too and that she would have to cope, there was an awkward silence. But surprisingly, she didn't back away. On the contrary, she began to see me differently, less as a savior, more as a sister. The therapy sessions continued to be sacred territory. There, I was able to speak unfiltered about the nights I blamed myself for not recognizing the signs, about the fear of never trusting anyone again, and even about the irrational jealousy I felt toward other women who lived seemingly happy marriages. What hurts me most isn't that he lied. It's that he made me dream. And I needed a dream so badly. I confessed in one session. My therapist simply nodded, giving me a simple truth. You can still dream. You just have to choose the right dreams. Meanwhile, the legal battle progressed slowly and bureaucratically. Mark was being sued for bigamy, fraudulent misrepresentation, and financial fraud. My lawyers discovered that, in addition to the loan in my name, he had used my CPF, Individual Taxpayer Registry, to open a fake bank account, moving funds of dubious origin. I, who had never missed a single payment, now found myself facing financial hell, a bad credit history, a maxed-out credit limit, charges from a bank I hadn't even known existed. The bills wouldn't wait for my pain to subside. With the help of a local social worker, I began attending a support group for victims of emotional and financial abuse. In the weekly meetings, held in a room at the community center smelling of stale coffee and crackers, I heard stories as devastating, if not more so, than my own. One woman told how her husband emptied their joint account and ran off with the nanny. Another, how she was used as a front in illegal schemes and was left in debt for decades. With each story, I felt less alone and more outraged. These women weren't weak. They were survivors, and so was I. My relationship with Elena deepened. We called each other on the anniversaries of our respective disasters, the day she was abandoned with 2 young children, the day I was left at the altar with a lie crumbling around me. She sent me pictures of the boys, playing soccer in the park, coloring pictures at school. They ask about you sometimes. They ask if you were deceived like me. And I tell them yes, but that you've become our ally, and that now no one will deceive anyone else in this story. That hurt, but it also gave me strength. We had become a trench of 2 women who refused to be eternal victims. At home, the dynamic with my parents also changed. My mother gradually stopped treating me as if I were made of glass. She began to trust herself more. She faced my father's diagnosis with more courage, began accepting professional help, and even made friends with other caregivers in the same situation. I began to see her as a real woman, not just my mother, with pain, with broken dreams, but also with resilience. I also began to indulge in small pleasures, reading novels on the porch, long walks along the old railroad track, afternoons at the local market buying artisanal breads and cheeses with limited funds, but with a taste of freedom. One random Saturday, between a vegetable stand and another selling antiques, I met a man named Gustavo. A widower, father of a 9-year-old girl, a retired history teacher who taught tutoring at the cultural center. He offered me coffee, and I almost refused. The fear was still there, lodged in my stomach. But I accepted. We talked about books, old movies, childhood in small towns, and the power of oral history. We didn't exchange phone numbers that afternoon. Just shy glances and unspoken promises. But I returned home smiling, and that was a miracle in itself. There was no forgiveness for Mark. He made choices that affected lives, but I could choose what to do with the wreckage he left. And I chose to rebuild, brick by brick, calmly, with boundaries, with dignity. Rebuilding in silence wasn't cowardice. It was strategy, because sometimes the greatest victory is the one no one sees. Only you feel it, deep in your chest, when you realize you can breathe again without fear. Time has a strange way of healing, not with haste, nor with perfection, but with a silent insistence that, little by little, transforms pain into a scar. And it was then, almost imperceptibly, that I realized the rain had passed. Not that life had returned to normal. What was normal, after all? The woman who dreamed of a house in the suburbs, of Sunday dinners and children's birthdays with balloons and chocolate cake was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more cautious, and, strangely, more hopeful, albeit in a more sober, more down-to-earth way. Spring arrived first in the city before it arrived in me. The Ipes began to bloom on the sidewalks of my street, the fields around the school filled with vibrant green, and the markets once again sold fresh strawberries and homemade breads with the aroma of childhood. The town, small as ever, continued with its predictable routines, but inside me, something new was stirring. With Gustavo, conversations turned into encounters. First casual, downtown cafes, used book fairs, riverside strolls. Then more intimate, silent walks that said more than words, exchanging books with handwritten notes, silences that weren't awkward but full of presence. He was different, perhaps because he'd also been through grief, his own, for his wife, who died suddenly in an accident. There was a quiet sadness in him, like background music, but there was also tenderness, respect for each other's time, something I never knew I needed so much. He never pressured me. He was just there, constant, gentle, like the porch light we turn on at night just to know someone is still awake with us. Over time, I met his daughter, Clara, a sweet, observant girl who at first looked at me with curiosity and a slight distrust, normal for someone who had lost her mother so young. But little by little, we found each other. I helped with her homework, read with her before bed when she was with us, and she taught me about her world, the music she liked, the games she played, the drawings she made. Something unexpected blossomed between us, an affection without demands, a friendship in the making. At home, my father experienced a brief improvement. The new medication helped stabilize his seizures, and on a sunny Sunday morning, he called me by my proper name. "Anna," he said, looking into my eyes with rare clarity. "You are strong. Your mother always said you would be the foundation of our family." I cried right there, on the porch, with him holding my hand. It was as if, for a moment, life had returned to its original form, not as it had been before, but as it could still be. My mother began attending a support group for wives of Alzheimer's patients. She made friends. She started going out for coffee with other women who shared the same pain. For the first time in years, she told me she was thinking about dyeing her hair dark red, like when she was young. I encouraged her. When she returned from the salon, her hair glistening in the afternoon sun, she looked like a new version of herself. Or perhaps the old version rediscovered. With the trial over, Mark was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The news spread through the city, but it no longer caused a stir. People had moved on with their lives. And so had I. The judge ordered compensation that, though modest, helped cover some of the debts he left in my name. More importantly, the sentence brought something more precious, closure. I no longer had to look back, waiting for answers. He was part of a past that no longer defined me. I continued attending the support group at the community center. But now it was different. I didn't just listen, I spoke. I told my story not as a tragedy, but as a warning. I wore my scars proudly, because they proved I'd survived. I even began giving short talks at schools, talking about abusive relationships, personal finance, and the value of maintaining your independent identity, even within a relationship. Making my pain useful gave meaning to what had previously seemed so cruelly random. On the anniversary of the almost ceremony, I decided I wouldn't cry. Instead, I organized a picnic in the park with my family and a few close friends. I brought cake, made lemonade, and brought a bucket full of white balloons. Each person wrote on a piece of paper something they wanted to leave behind, hurts, fears, frustrations, and we placed it inside the balloons before releasing them into the sky. Watching those white dots drift away, floating toward the endless blue sky, was an image I cherished. And there, on that gentle summer afternoon, I understood. Rain doesn't last forever. Sometimes it comes to cleanse the earth, wash away what's rotten, and allow something new to grow. And that day, looking around, I realized something new was indeed blooming. Today, when I look back, I don't feel angry. And that, in itself, is a miracle. There's something no one tells us about pain. It doesn't go away all at once. It transforms. It becomes lighter, quieter, like an ember that, though still hot, no longer burns as before. And over time, you learn to walk with it, to shape a new life around the empty space it left. My wedding never happened. But life, yes, moved on. The episode with Mark, the scandal, the local newspapers, the curious looks at the grocery store or in line at the post office, all of that faded over time. The city moved on, and so did I. Shame gave way to courage. Exposure became a learning experience. Today, when someone recognizes me and says, "You're that girl from the story," I respond with a serene smile. Yes. And I survived. I think that's what remains after the hurricane, the chance to rebuild better than before. And that's what I did with every piece of me that remained. Gustavo and I stayed together. Not like in fairy tales, but like two adults who know all too well the weight of loss. Over time, our Sundays became routine, freshly brewed coffee, newspapers spread out on the table, Clara telling us about her school adventures. I discovered that true love is made more of presence than promises. It doesn't swear to the future, it builds the present, every day, with patience, affection, and truth. At school, I was promoted. I took on the role of pedagogical coordinator, which allowed me to be closer to teachers and students, creating emotional support projects for children in vulnerable situations. It wasn't just about teaching math or Portuguese, it was about shaping stronger, more aware human beings. Everything I wish someone had taught me when I began my own journey. My mother rediscovered the joy of small things. She's learning to paint watercolors. She says the colors help lift the weight of the difficult days with her dad, whose memories continue to unravel day after day. But now, when he calls her pretty country girl, she just smiles, adjusts the scarf in her hair, and replies, "It's me, Joao. Your wife. I always have been." Their love, though confused, remains an anchor. And me. I started writing. First in a diary, then in chronicles. Now I transform my experiences into words, like the one you're reading. I learned that storytelling is a form of healing, that sharing our pain transforms shame into courage and scars into bridges. Perhaps what saved me wasn't time itself, but what I decided to do with it. Because time can be an ally or an enemy, and we are the ones who choose. I chose to look forward, even with fear, even with doubts, even with longing for what could have been. Today, I no longer need a white dress to feel whole. Not even promises at the altar to know what I deserve. What remains is the certainty that surviving is, in itself, a kind of victory. And that starting over, even amidst the rubble, is a silent and powerful form of rebirth. The pain is gone. The shame is gone. But the strength I discovered within myself, that remains. And maybe, just maybe, that's the best part of the story.